Now we have a special guest, and we're hoping that there can be a bit of a talk, and then we can have a Q&A. So, gentlemen, ladies, if you could plug in the HDMI cable. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Wow, I can even see some people in the audience.
Yes, sir!
Now stop hiding. Put this back. Otherwise.
ET phone home. Stampato solo le cabece.
Sometimes I ask, why does this keep happening to me? Other people who seem to be trying beaming in various places will understand this is very tricky. But Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, and Jake is here too.
Okay. So I thought I would just say that I've been following the IGF for quite some time now, and we were involved in net deal in various ways as well. And so I've come to see what the IGF is about in geostrategic terms. I don't know if people here properly understand it, but the IGF should not be called an Internet Governance Forum. It should be called an Internet Censorship Forum. And the purpose of the IGF is to strategically deploy the new law that will govern our new international society. As the internet has merged with society and society has merged with the internet has become a major element of power within human interaction and within geopolitics. And so what laws and bodies are to govern the new international society is something that major power actors are looking to sew up before minor actors are able to resist or to stake a claim of their own. And for IGF, really I suppose its dominance is by what we would call the West. There's some actors in particular who are significantly involved in it, and that is the United States, the UK, and interestingly, Sweden. And some elements like Net Mundial, at least in some direction in which it was going, not of course what finally happened, are perceived to be rival institutions or rival forums that will take matters in a different direction. So this forum, the Internet Ungovernance Forum, is really quite important in stopping the future of the world in terms of its laws, standards, and international bodies being sewn up by those organizations that already have significant power. And you can look at the events that were not hosted and the people who were not invited to the IGF. Yes, a lot of that has to do with the host country, Turkey, and the extensive censorship that it has been engaged in, and the desires by Western countries, principally the United States, to have Turkish support for what's going on in the Middle East. But also it is reflective of what is happening with these Western-backed forums in general. For example, earlier this year there was the Stockholm Internet Forum, which is the the Swedish-backed version of the same thing, run by Carl Bildt, the hawkish Swedish foreign minister. And that forum has excluded for the last 4 years. This year excluded Jacob Appelbaum from the Tor project, and it's excluded Edward Snowden as well from that forum. And perhaps I understand, having done these things a lot, that these remote meetings can get frightfully boring, at least when I'm presenting them, because it seems like I'm just stuck here as some disembodied figure on the TV, but actually I'm a real flesh and blood, a human being that is somewhat remote in difficult circumstances, but nonetheless live. And to prove that to you, you're going to ask some questions. Chris, do you want to proceed?
So if there's anyone in the audience that has some questions for Julian, primarily I'd like to prioritize the voices of the women of Turkey at a request from some of the organizers. So if there are women from Turkey that would like to ask questions of Julian Assange, I know some of the people in this audience were reading our book, Cypherpunks, and if you'd like to ask a question of Julian, maybe we could get a microphone passed. This is the microphone for Julian, and do you have a question? Right in the front. She's got a question. Fantastic.
Özgür yazılımın bu özgürleşme hareketindeki yerini merak ediyorum aslında. Hayatımıza ne katacağını, açık kültürün bunu öğrenmek istiyorum.
So she asked
Sorry,
about...
I just heard the phrase open culture.
Yeah, she asked about what do you think about free software in the context of freedom of the internet and freedom of the human rights, and also in the context of the open culture and free culture.
Okay, well, I haven't ever spoken about this before, about open free culture. But, and so my perspective may be a bit different to some people. But what we have now in the West and Western influenced countries is industrial culture. So our culture is largely an industrial product, and it is produced over the last 100 years by the entertainment and media industries. And as a result, the culture has been very significantly skewed to the interests of those industries and the individuals within them and the associated power groups. And it is not a bona fide organic culture. And so this is why I support piracy. I support the restriction from copyright, not because, like some other people do, so I think necessarily people should be always free to run any sort of organization that's involved in that business, but rather because I believe it will disempower major industrial organizations that are producing industrial culture. And industrial culture is not real culture. Real culture comes from the organic, vibrant interactions of individuals into society, freely exploring how they see the world with each other from these small industries. That's real culture. Industrial culture is not real culture.
Great. And do you have another question? I think we do. I saw some hands. You can open it up to the whole floor, but there's another woman right there in the fourth row. Julian? 1 second. Okay. So the person asking a question now, Julian, but they'll ask it in English, so.
Could you please talk a little bit about censorship in Turkey and your impression of where Turkish media freedom is going and the impact that has on domestic and foreign policy as well as lives of Turkish people?
Well, it seems clear from my reading of the situation from views shared to me by contacts in Turkey that Turkish media freedom is going down the tubes. If you look at the country with the largest number of journalists in prison, it is presently Turkey. When I last looked about a year ago, it was 48 journalists. Of course, some countries have clever ways of classifying who's in prison and who's not in prison. For example, the United States doesn't accept that it has any journalists in prison, but it actually has people involved in the business of journalism who can criminalise in other ways. So we have to be a bit careful with the different standards of what is journalism and what isn't when it comes to criminalisation of information sharing. I don't want to be, however, I don't want to be a Western cultural imperialist. It is a fact that smaller countries are the recipient of the dumping of industrial cultural product and industrial media product. And their internal agendas start to get set by the dumping of that product. So there does need to be, if a society is to remain true to itself and is to remain independent, there does need to be some kind of regulation about how big major media organizations can grow, and if they are very large organizations, disincentives to them on telling significant and politically destabilizing lies. So that's quite obvious when we look at the very smallest countries that deal with the very largest countries and the industrial dumping of propaganda or cultural, industrial spare product onto those countries. But what is happening in Turkey is mainly not about that. What is happening in Turkey is concrete censorship done in order to preserve the appearance of authority or the seemingly pristine qualities of authority. I believe this is counterproductive. Authority should come from the legitimate exercise of authority, the proven responsible exercise of authority, and fairly documented in the media. It shouldn't come from censoring those who are describing what is really going on.
Great. We have another question here in the front row.
Julian, we are very sad to see you are not free. We are living a kind of prison. And it is same for Edward Snowden also. Why I am telling this to you, I would like to see Nobel Peace Award should be given to you or Edward Snowden. But public attention, public interest is not very wide, especially in Turkey, but also in the world. I am a journalist, I am writing about censorship, but it is not only blockage of websites, but also they are preventing to make investment in fiber lines in Turkey. This is also a kind of, and also trying to keep the monopoly, although it is showing privatization and Turkish Telecom, I mean. I will ask you, we are writing the stories, but public attention is only raising their voices when a website is blocked. But they are not interested with the whole story. They are not giving reaction against some stupid actions. What are you thinking about it? How the public will be awake, will be awareness.
Well, I think you can combine some features. One of the problems in Turkey is that the censorship climate was allowed to develop. And many people in Turkey allowed this to develop who should have known better. They allowed it to develop because they were happy for censorship to be used against the Kurds and to be used against the references to the Armenian genocide. But we're seeing in country after country that if you allow a censorship regime to develop against one marginalised group who may be an irritant to the majority, soon enough this is going to cross over to the majority of people. For example, this text I have behind me, this is my most favourite and least favourite paper we have ever published, and it is about Turkey. This cable has everything in it. It has Turkey, how the head of NATO got his job, the one who's currently going around, the one who's currently having a meeting in Wales, promising corruptly, Obama, the violation of the separation of powers in Denmark, and the complete censorship of the largest Kurdish language TV station, ROJ. So I invite you to search for that story. You can just search for WikiLeaks ROJ TV to find it. But in a nutshell, the Prime Minister of Denmark, former Prime Minister of Denmark, Rasmussen, did a secret deal with Turkey and Obama to become the head of NATO in exchange for the complete destruction of the largest Kurdish language TV broadcaster, ROJ TV. And all of them were in on it, all that was happening, and they set up a corrupt judicial procedure in there involving the Danish intelligence agencies, the Danish judiciary, and the Danish Prime Minister, and Obama, and representatives from Turkey to completely destroy that TV station. So there's an example that if you allow censorship to develop somewhere, allow these unjust acts to occur somewhere, soon enough they're going to occur everywhere. Similarly, we have published cables that relate to the censorship of the Turkish National Archives, the Ottoman archives, and the destruction there of references to the mass slaughter of the Armenians, because that's an embarrassing thing for Turkey. So if you allow censorship to develop for one group or another group, soon enough it's going to affect everyone. So how perhaps you can get more people to talk about the censorship that is occurring is to combine stories. So there is no censorship, for example, without surveillance. The censorship story in Turkey is also a surveillance story, is also part of the mass surveillance story. How do you know when someone is going to your website in order to block it? We have to monitor every single request that is going to these websites. It's the same reason that Tor, which provides anonymity to people, also provides censorship resistance. Because if you can't see what websites people are going to, then you can't see what it is that you need to block. So these two technologies and these two stories are in fact in many ways exactly the same thing.
Great. And now do we have another question here? Is there another? All right. You've asked before, I'm sorry, but I will give you the microphone later. Can someone pass this microphone back to the woman with the really frizzy hair waving her hand?
story that's come out just in the last week that the National Security Agency, spying on Kurdish leadership and others, passed that information to Turkey, and it was used for targeting purposes. So there we see something that is, we also see in Pakistan, Afghanistan, in Yemen, that mass surveillance is part of the kill chain. That in order to work out where a target is, or might be, or might probably be, you need to collect information about the wealth, and that feeds into the kill chain. So people who are involved in the production of mass surveillance technologies, the selling of it, the running of it, are part of a conspiracy to commit killing or murder. That's actually just been looked at now the last couple of days with a report by Reprieve here in the UK into cables laid by British Telecom and their involvement in carrying information related to targeting of drones, and whether British Telecom may have some legal, certainly moral complicity in that killing. But going back to what I said previously, that if you start allowing censorship of some group, it will spread soon enough to the others. Well, here we have an example where if you start allowing surveillance of a minority, this favoured minority, then soon enough it's going to spread to others. That's what happened in Turkey. Turkey was happy to accept US surveillance of the Kurds and feed off that information. But soon enough, the Turkish leadership itself became subject to that same NSA surveillance.
Great. Next question. Got a couple hands over here. Maybe you bring the microphone to the...
So we saw that the people story in
one is the 5 isomines, which is predominantly run by the National Security Agency, the GCHQ in the UK, and the other partner countries of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And then there's second tier partners there's about 30 countries involved, exchanging some amount of information that Western allies in various sense. But the centre of power of that is the United States, the National Security Agency, and it completely dwarfs any other country's international surveillance efforts. There's the size of the Five Eyes Alliance and its spying is a matter of concern for the whole of civilization, because it covers enough of the active parts of civilization to sweep up the majority of intellectual and economic power worldwide. No other country is in that position. And even you see the head of the National Security Agency admitting that. Then there's some things happening domestically. So domestically, Chinese surveillance is a serious concern domestically. And other countries are moving towards that same pervasive domestic Chinese surveillance model as the technology becomes cheap and cheap and cheap. For example, even in Libya, shortly in 2009, before the fall of the Gaddafi government, a whole nation interception system was deployed called Amesis, bought off the French, and the French had backdoored it and sucked out the information from the deployment of that system, which was no doubt which no doubt gave the French and Allied forces confidence about which elements in Libyan society to destroy when they went in there in 2011. So I would caution the Turkish government in its deployment of domestic surveillance to understand that the information, if it's collected by the Turkish government, will not remain permanently in Turkish government hands. The National Security Agency or whoever it's buying this technology off, or corrupt contractors who are installing it, will also suck down the data, and that will compromise Turkish sovereignty.
Well, Julian, we're all really surprised that you learned Turkish that quickly. And kudos to you and your amazing bagel fish there. You surprised basically everyone in the room. But apparently, according to the nice Turkish gentleman here, he actually did answer the question that was asked in Turkish, for everyone that was wondering why you just started talking. So we have a question from Chris Segoyan, who's actually moved off the podium here, and he has a question. Maybe Chris, do you want to ask in the microphone?
Julian, so you just sort of hinted at this with the description of the French surveillance company. There's a professor in the UK, George Menezes, who had a really interesting essay that he wrote earlier this year on cyber colonialism, in which he basically says that smaller countries have to pick which major power they wish to be hacked by. Either they're going to install American-made technology, and then they're going to be backdoors in that equipment, or they have to install Chinese technology, or I guess in this case French technology, and then have the backdoors there be used by those governments. What do you think of that concept? I mean, do you think it's right that these smaller countries do have to submit because of their lack of a domestic technology industry, or do you think open source technology can actually provide a way for smaller countries to be free of this major nation-state surveillance?
So what you're suggesting, it's actually a very important question, but what you're suggesting, Chris, is open source domestic mass surveillance, is that right?
Well, I wasn't hinting in that direction. I think, in the context of fears about foreign-made backbone technology or foreign-made telephone switches, there are a lot of countries, and Edward hinted at this also in his written statement that was read out before we spoke. I think in George's essay, he was really talking more about national communications infrastructure and his desire to not have foreign-made equipment, whether in Australia or Indonesia or New Zealand, wherever. But not so much surveillance stuff.
It's a serious problem. I have dealt with a number of small, well, not small, but small, medium-sized American countries and countries in Southeast Asia, and they absolutely have this problem. In fact, one of my friends who's in the secure telephone business described to me a few years ago the position taken by a number of countries in the Middle East when buying cryptographic telephones, which was they could pick whether they were going to be, whether the phones were going to be backdoored by the Americans and broader access to the UK and others exchanging that data, or whether the phones were going to be backdoored by the Chinese, or whether the phones were going to be backdoored by the Russians. And what those Middle Eastern rulers were, intelligence agencies were most concerned about, of course, is their domestic rivals, and those rivals just are on their borders. And they actually were in a position where they also wanted to make the US feel reassured that at the intelligence agency level they weren't making plots against the US. So by having the US listen in to what they were doing, the US would be less paranoid and aggressive towards them. So that's something that's been going on for a while. There is an important movement now that's really been going for a few years, but it's really been kicked along by Edward Snowden revelations of developing industrial standards for telecommunications, encryption of telecommunications, and open source technology that can be developed by several different organizations. But it is actually really, really hard. As soon as a telecommunications or cryptography a product or infrastructure or piece of software takes off, the incentives to corrupt the people behind it, or the people behind the other bits of software that other bits of software users, or so on down the track, or to hack those servers, becomes such that I find it hard to believe that anything can be secure in that way. What is done now in terms of backdooring things is to introduce stuff called backdoors, where you just change a single character and it looks like it's just a typing mistake, and it becomes almost impossible to prove who inserted that, and you can do it many, many layers upstream to the software, and just wait until all the dependencies cascade down until your backdoor takes hold. So I think that's a serious problem. I think it's to properly solve it, academic research is needed, and to standardize communication protocols in such a way that there can't be any covert carriers, and to standardize encryption protocols in such a way that the intercompatibility of the different types of systems is proof that there is not a backdoor in the system. A hard thing to do.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Just to take a show of hands, how many people in the room think they'd like to ask a question in the next 15 minutes? So we've got a few. We've got a few more, Julian. And to this guy in the front here first.
Hi, this is Yamanakis from the Istanbul Big University. And by reference to your recent book called When Google Made Leaks, I would like to ask you to, if possible, comment about the practices of Google, also other social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, if you have any knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. I'm rather pleased you asked that question, because I have a book coming out on the 18th. You see there's a little button there which says, "I'm feeling evil." So the position of Google and those other major companies is something that I've been investigating, and this book documents what I found out in relation to Google. And the basic story, which is true for all these companies, is that when a company becomes extremely large, and Google is now has a market capitalization of $400 billion, it is by market capitalization the second largest company in the United States after Apple. And it is a type of company that is based on a worldwide usage or exports. It starts to lean heavily on, in the case of the United States, the US State Department and the US intelligence agencies, and those organizations that have the function of understanding and manipulating the rest of the world. Because what does Google know about how to influence regulation in Turkey? Well, it may know something now, but historically it's known very little. That's not its expertise. Its expertise is a technology and marketing company. So that entering into these relationships, which you see with Coke-Kazan and Lockheed Martin and all these big international brands that we know about, has caused a social alliance between a social and kind of practical alliance between some of the major power figures that are in control of Google and the US State Department and some US intelligence agency figures in the US military, to the degree that Google is now formally defined as part of the US defense industrial base. And that formal definition doesn't mean that Google is simply a very valuable communications medium that supplies Gmail to soldiers or advertising to recruit soldiers. Being part of the defense industrial base means that it does critical, customized work for the military. And when you have an organization that in practice is deploying its power for geopolitical and geostrategic reasons in order to, it seems, satisfy that network of connections and favor exchange, that becomes a really serious thing. If you look at, for example, the National Security Agency's penetration of China, okay, yeah, it has penetrated China in a whole lot of ways, concentrating on high-value systems and, of course, flows of data out of China. But Google has really domestically penetrated China, and not as a search engine. It's been excluded in its obvious function. It's down to something like 3 to 7% of the market as a search engine in China, but through Android. So through all the other, and YouTube and all the other Google properties and advertising, it is able to surveil a large number of human beings in detail with a new form of industrial surveillance, which is then accessed by the National Security Agency and other deep state actors. And to give you an idea of this scale, there are now 1.5 million Android-powered, that's the Google operating system powered devices turned on for the first time each day. Not turned on each day, but turned on for the first time each day. That means that the extent of Google's surveillance ability just on Android is expanding by 1.5 million people a day. And that's their locations, what their language is, what their web browsing and so on, their iPhone, their contacts, their email. And that's more than the population of the United States per year. It's near the population of Europe per year. Can you imagine if this conference that we are having right now was expanding by 1.5 million people a year, or that WikiLeaks as an organization, in terms of the number of its sources, was expanded by 1.5 million per year? And the company is also investing in support 8 drone companies recently, and it does customized work for the military and so on. So even if Google or a company like it didn't have that kind of geopolitical infiltration, even if it didn't consider itself as part of American exceptionalism, whenever you have that much concentration of power within a jurisdiction, it's the same as having an unlimited oil well somewhere, fountaining great wealth. It doesn't stay there for long. In fact, people with guns turn up and start demanding a cut. And that is what happens with Google, it's what's happened with Facebook, and it is why those two companies, amongst others, were so attractive to the National Security Agency and the FBI. And at the end of the day, if you know where something is, and it's within a jurisdiction you can affect, you can send your people around with guns. And in the end, if human organizations, if the human structure of something is revealed, guns trump every other form of human allegiance.
Next question.
And let me just finish that. So I'll just read something from the first chapter in the analysis. It's actually it's a quote that we managed to find from Thomas Friedman, who wrote this in 1999. And Thomas Friedman is a columnist for the New York Times, and he, self-description, is an extreme centrist. And this extreme liberal centrism is something that is now the dominant ideology in the United States. And it's not liberalism in the sense that we once knew it, of that people should be free. It is a sort of state liberalism that has emerged, and has merged with some of the dominant players in Silicon Valley. So Tom Friedman says that, well, I'll paraphrase to begin with, that it's sometimes not enough to leave the global dominance of the American technology corporations to something as material as the free market. So here's the quote. The hidden hand of the market will never work without a hidden fist. McDonald's cannot flourish without McDonnell Douglas, the designer of the F-15 fighter jet. And the hidden fist that keeps the world safe for Silicon Valley's technologies to flourish is called the US Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. That's not Chomsky. This is an American liberal centrist. And that now, dressed up in different ways, is the dominant ideology within the West more broadly, and it's an ideology that, having flourished in the West, in its authoritarian, connected, postmodern component, is being picked up by other countries that also strive for the power of the dominant political, military, and technological elite.
All right, and now, sharing out your question.
Hi. And well, apparently it didn't. Now there's this belief that open data and open source technologies will change everything, and like will just make the power structures. Mainly, especially open source technologies, they are mainly dominated by white male. So I wonder what you think about this whole craze about on IT or technology, and this whole belief that it's one day you manage to find the right technology to just change the power structures, whereas in all these years it's actually proved that rather than undermining the power structures, it's just strengthening the established power structures. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think we that most technological pundits and people who talk about technology are ignorant, provincial, puerile, facile. I'm not sure what the problem is that they're being white and male, but they are certainly very provincial people, geographically provincial, intellectually provincial. But the question is, I suppose, what changes things at all? And given that human beings are, at least at the moment, essentially genetically invariant, human genetics is not changing very quickly at all. And human ideological ideas, well, there's a great cacophony of them now, because we have quite a cheap distribution. So it's not clear that there's going to be any real change that comes about as a result of changes in human ideology. There's so many different aspects of ideology that have been explored in political ideas. But I know it's cool to kind of talk about them, but there's so many that are out there. If we look at history, it seems that the ideological ideas are there like seeds scattered in a field. You have all sorts of seeds and all sorts of weed seeds scattered in a field, and what grows is mostly dependent on what type of fertilizer is added to the soil, what the weather is, whether the soil is alkaline or acidic. And it is technology that is new. And new technology over many years, going all the way back to industrialization, going all the way back to printing press and various forms of industrialization, has changed human society in many ways. Now, there's an interesting question about whether it has resulted in more or less human liberty, more or less human suffering. But I think the desire to ascribe positive attributes to it is because there doesn't seem to really be another game in town. And so technology is evolving in all sorts of ways that are used for extremely malign purposes. New forms of weaponry, new forms of centralization, new forms of control and surveillance of individuals. And so that seems to be the game that's afoot, that is changing everything in a negative sense. So if one has any hope against it, we are going to have to try and repurpose or redesign some of this technology. I think it's a similar description to when you look at the post-colonial movements in Africa, taking up AK-47s. It's not that these movements wanted to be proponents of the AK-47. What they wanted was independence and self-determination, but a necessary tool to combat M16s is AK-47s, and that seems to be the only game in town. And I think overall, technology tends to be hostile to human liberty. And the reason I say that is because technology is sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated. And to develop, and maintain, and build and source all the ingredients for something that is complex and sophisticated, you need, generally speaking, organization and centralization to understand that sophistication. And with organization and dependencies on other organizations comes about an ability to centralize and to control that technology in the hands of centralization. We can look, for example, we go back to 1945 and my favorite essay, which is by George Orwell on the atomic bomb, which had just been dropped 2 months before, and introduced the term Cold War for the first time. And Orwell looked at the future trajectory of the invention of the atomic bomb, which was a device which at that stage was only made by the United States, but clearly in its construction could only be made by major industrial states. And he looked forward and said, this is going to cause something like a domination of just 1 or 2 superpowers over the next 50 years, and predicted essentially correctly the geopolitical architecture of the world, whereas there's other technologies, for example, like rifles, where it's one man, one rifle. Talk separately about what manufactures rifles, but once they are distributed, once they are taken from this original point of manufacture, they can be deployed essentially on a democratic basis. Now, there are some analogues in technology to this position of deployable goods, regardless of their complex origin, can end up in the hands of individuals who can deploy them on essentially a democratic basis of one person, one effective piece of technology. And an example of that is cryptographic programs. That, yes, they may require quite a bit of organization behind their development, but once they enter into the hands of individuals, they can be deployed and run autonomously. That control to the originator is disconnected. In the same way that the provision of an AK-47 or a rifle is disconnected from the manufacturer. So there are some of those forms of technologies. And through network alliance of people cooperating, across the globe, people who seek independence and self-determination cooperating, one can also subsidize what is that interconnectedness and dependency which complex things need to originate. An example of that is the open source ecosystem, where it's not that easy to somehow grab hold of the connections that you could normally grab hold of when you're looking at a big supply chain that is necessary to produce something, say like an F-15 or a mid-fighter jet or a complex extraction technology like the production of, say, nuclear energy or iron ore, or these other big sources of power.
So Julian, we have, by the schedule, about 45 seconds left, though I suspect people would be willing to tolerate hearing you talk for a few more minutes. I wanted to use my position as the moderator and ask you to make a prescriptive statement. That is, yesterday when I gave the keynote, I basically said that I felt that we needed economic, political, social, cultural, and technological action in order to change the issue of mass surveillance and the issue of targeted surveillance, and I put it in the frame of social justice. And so I think mass surveillance is a social justice issue. I think transparency is a social justice issue, just due process. These issues have to do with justice, right? And as you said quite often, transparency is the method, but the goal is justice. And I wonder if, in the spirit of some of those African liberation movements, if you could suggest to people what they might be able to do. I know that some people here feel quite hopeful, but they wonder what action they could take, or what it is that they could do personally, or how they could support these causes. And I wonder if you could close on a note trying to be uplifting, trying to suggest what could be done in order to make positive change. I know that it's hard for us to be positive when talking about a pretty scary and dangerous world, but I think you could do it.
Look, I've thought about this quite a lot in terms of negative and positive descriptions. So let's sort of really look at this from a philosophical, or from a phenomenological description of what is happening. The whole world has been wired through itself. The internet has merged with society, society has merged with the internet, producing inevitably one global society, one global civilization. Its destiny is the destiny of all nations and all peoples. Now, when you connect a dominant power, when you connect a power center, a powerful power center, or what we have now is what we call an interesting postmodern network power, to everything else, what normally happens is the dominant center spreads out through its connections, we go back all the way through Roman roads, now through missiles and through the internet and mass surveillance and control of various forms of economic interaction. And you end up with a homogeneity and a conformist, sometimes authoritarian structure in the region of control. And so the whole world is moving into that. That's the reality. The whole world is becoming connected together economically and in terms of information flow, and therefore it's all going into the same place, whether we like it or not, and it's doing it extremely quickly. So you might say, well, what can be done about it? Well, there's simply no choice but to do something about it. There's no area of life that you can escape from this phenomenon. Injustice at a large scale is arbitrary, and it will affect you no matter where you are. It is going to affect you. Then we have, in the end, let's be realistic, we're human beings living on the earth. In the end, you personally are dead anyway, soon enough. So what are you going to do with your time? Are you going to do something that's serious, that involves the fate of your civilization and your family and your nation, or are you going to do something that's not serious? I say it's just given the reality of the circumstance and understanding of it, that it is impossible to sit back and let this situation proceed. One has to try and to make the best effort that you can. And the important thing in doing that is to not give up and to stay creative and look for opportunities as they arise and as they come together. There's some reasons, there's some ways that we have to produce something important, and there are some important phenomena. For example, cryptography as a phenomenon gives individuals in certain circumstances the ability to stand up to the full power of a superpower. What is now an international superpower is not yet able to break directly encryption. So that's an example, hope. The same connection technology that is clustering everything together and permitting mass surveillance and permitting mass censorship and permitting domination of the centre to the periphery is also empowering new forms of independence. Look, Scotland is pushing towards a referendum which will probably lose, but it might just win. But it wouldn't have happened a long time ago. The increasing independence and regional sovereignty of Latin America has happened in the past 10 years. Why? Yes, the US has taken its eye off the ball for a bit with the Middle East, but it's also because regionally and nationally, individuals are communicating faster, coming to faster decision-making, being able to coordinate and make alliances and their own postmodern network groups faster than the mass surveillance is able to understand that same phenomenon. So in some ways, what is to be done is to, yes, look at things from this interesting intellectual perspective and understand this broader phenomenon and where one's place is in it. But on the other hand, it is just doing what people have always done when we face these situations, which is to find people who are similarly minded, who are courageous, to stick together, to learn from the environment, to display solidarity with each other, and to never let any bit of ground be vacated. So it's not always just about, it's not always about winning, it's not always about setting important important examples, like some of our alleged sources have, like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, but it's also about never letting the other side, in this case, the side that is pushing towards authority and centralization and the diminution of the human condition, never giving that side a break, never vacating any ground, never retreating. And when it is necessary, just occasionally to retreat, retreating as slow as possible. And I believe that circumstance is something that, on the one hand, can produce perhaps a better world, but will certainly retard the degradation of justice that is developing in certain places and is nonetheless a very healthy thing for human beings to do with their time. And that healthy activity creates, in my view, the sort of solidarity and international society, or aspect of international society, that human beings should aspire to. So it's not just about winning in the end. We can win right now in terms of creating that form of human international solidarity right now.
Great. Well, and unless you have any last words, I'd like to thank you for coming here to the conference, and I'd like to say, a luta continua, the struggle continues. Thank you, Julian.
Great. Thanks.